is the need to ensure that we have backup generation. Now I think seniors complexes have generators, but they will not run the complex. They'll keep the hall light on and so on, but you can find the door, but you can't run the stove in your apartment. You can't keep the building heated. And if we have an emergency, it's going to be widespread. In other words, there'll be lots of communities, places where you would think you want to take the elderly or anyone to a community, a single location, that they're going to be without power as well. So I think one of the smart moves of this government would be to ensure that seniors complexes are fully operational when it comes to power generation, so that you're not taking 80 and 90-year-old people out into inclement weather and put them somewhere for a month. I can see this is a recipe for disaster. And if the government believes in the adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, well, this would be an ounce that would be cheap in compared to the alternative. Now, in my community of Enfield, the Montgomery Branch Legion has, I think, has paperwork, hopefully, on the Minister Fage's desk in an application for funding to make that a standalone site in terms of power generation. They're trying to get a generator for that site so that if an emergency does happen, that we'll at least have that location to take some of the surrounding people to. But this is I think is a serious issue. I know we've raised issues similar. I know we raised issues around at hurricane season after Hurricane Juan, and the minister's response was, well, that's hypothetical. Well, gee, it's not so hypothetical when a hurricane has just hit you. So to think that with all we know about the change in climate, global warming, etc., we know that weather patterns are not what they used to be, and that you get these extreme changes in weather, and we can seriously wind up with the equivalent of the Quebec ice storm. And the more or most serious part of this is if you think about Hurricane Juan, if you think about White Juan, if you think about any of these particular disasters that have affected Nova Scotia Power and the lack of power for Nova Scotians, one of the key components of these outages has been that Nova Scotia Power could get help from Maine, get help from New Brunswick, get help from Quebec. But what the government doesn't seem to think that something that could impact Nova Scotia, if it was a weather system, could certainly be large enough to impact New Brunswick and Maine and Quebec. So therefore, there's not going to be any help. We're not going to have anyone coming over the hill to help Nova Scotia Power get the lights back on. And that is going to be serious, Mr. Speaker, and what makes it even more serious is the fact that this is a company that has cut its workforce so that maintenance of its infrastructure has been let go. And I would think that besides giving a dividend to its shareholders, it might want to think about hiring another, 25 or whatever, 50 linemen, and have those people actually bring in the infrastructure up to scratch, number one, but also you'd have them on staff in case of an emergency. And if 50 linemen at $50,000 a year was to cost $25 million, then instead of having a profit of $100 million, you'd have a profit of $75 million. But you'd have the lights on. And I would think that in terms of a monopoly, which is what this company has. It has a monopoly to sell electricity to Nova Scotians, then this would be something that the Nova Scotia government would be interested to see, that they would regulate this company to this point to ensure the delivery of service in time of an emergency. And if anybody is foolhardy enough to think that those emergencies won't happen, well, they have happened. And we've only just slightly dodged them. In other words, the track of Hurricane Juan was relatively narrow compared to the province, and it didn't affect everybody the same as it did those along that track. So therefore, you know, we didn't have enough personnel at Nova Scotia Power. They still had to get help. They still had to bring linemen in from other jurisdictions to help us on that 50-kilometer track that Hurricane Juan went through the province. But what would happen if it was twice that? What would happen if it was the whole province? Then we would be in serious trouble, and we'd be in very serious trouble if after this disaster you get, you know, temperatures of 20 below for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I mean, if there was an upside to Hurricane Juan, it was that the weather afterwards was beautiful. I mean, as far as people having to get out and work and restore those lines, they had absolutely gorgeous weather to do that. It was sunny and warm, and it stayed that way for a long period of time. If we get in a situation where this is January or February and it's 20 below for a month, then that's going to seriously impact our ability to get the power restored, Mr. Speaker. And now, my colleagues have all, I think, pretty well touched on this issue of the energy poor. And it's a really interesting point, because I have to say, I would assume that all of us, and if not all of us, most of us, have had our constituents call us in regard to the inability to pay their power bill. So therefore, we make the calls to Nova Scotia Power and try to, you know, bargain for some payment schedule or whatever. And quite often, most often, these people are people who are on community services. So I think in all the cases that have come to my office, we were able to come up with a plan, or the people at community services were able to come up with a plan to pay that bill and for that person to pay back that money. Well, you know, here's someone who doesn't have enough money to pay their power bill. So then we're going to cut their check a little bit off, $40 a month or whatever, to go pay back to community services because they covered their bill. So they didn't have enough money to start with. Now they have less money. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I really find it kind of odd that the taxpayers of Nova Scotia are bailing out the company, really, by trying to help these people, but we're paying the bill for a corporation that makes $100 million in profit every year. Now, doesn't that seem to be odd? It seems strange to me. And if they have, I remember, I think 2 years ago, let's see, Mr. Husselson, Mr. Tedesco, and Mr. Doig came to our caucus, and it was around the time that the Stora was looking for a change in the rate. I think it's about 2 years ago. They got concessions from the woodlot owners. They got concessions from the municipality. I think they got concessions from the union, and they were looking for concessions from Nova Scotia Power. And so, you know, the thrust of this conversation was that they were looking at the possibility of giving a rate, preferential rate to Stora. So my question to them at that time was, okay, let's say you give Stora a break in its power rate. Does that mean that I'm going to pick it up? Oh, no, they assured me. That doesn't mean that. We have, you know, a price structure composed of about 14 different components. So, you know, we have large industrial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, no, you're not going to pick that up. I don't know. I don't know if it was a week before I read the headline in the newspaper after they gave Stora a change in its rate that they were going to go to the Utility and Review Board to look for a rate increase. And Nova Scotians, me, were going to pick up that preferred rate that Stora got. And so we were basically subsidizing Stora on their power. Now, it would seem to me that if the largest industrial user can get a preferential rate, why can't the poorest? Why can't the poorest people in Nova Scotia get a preferential rate? Well, I know part of the answer sits across the room from me. That you know, we deal with a bill, you know, if the wind catches this, and I know the Minister of Energy say, well, the wind might stop blowing, so there's not much chance that that would happen. But here's a bill. Well, if it wasn't for the title page and the cover on the back, that's the bill. That's it. That's. Yeah. Well, at least you didn't say propaganda. So here's a piece of legislation that is so slight that it really has nothing to do with the serious issues that Nova Scotians face in terms of their power delivery. Matter of fact, I was surprised that the Minister of Environment introduced this bill for second reading. So I was curious as to why the Minister of Energy didn't introduce this bill. So perhaps the Minister of Energy will be able to speak to this before it finally makes its way through the House, because I thought it was the responsibility of the Cabinet to look out for Nova Scotians. So. Well, if that's why you're here, then get at it. Because we sure haven't seen much of it, I got to say, since 1999. Matter of fact, if my memory's correct, didn't Stora get a preferential rate and go around the UARB? I mean, didn't the no? Okay. Wasn't there something about that? Yeah, seems to me that they were able to do that without going to the UARB, and maybe one of the ministers will explain that. The minister makes a good question there, and I would have to tell them they both have been equally bad. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I'll be interested to see this bill go through the House. I think this is what we would refer to as a better than nothing bill. The government obviously doesn't want to tackle real questions about energy in this province. I won't go get it because I'll be blamed for having a prop. But any of the members opposite who want to look at the Atlantic Forestry Journal, the latest publication, there is a couple of very good articles on biomass and the production of electricity from that. I have a couple of dairy farmers in my area, or biomass actually I should say, for the Atlantic Forestry Journal. I have a couple of dairy farmers in my area who are really keen to be underway on biogas, and I would say that absolutely no incentive, as far as I can see, coming from this province or federally to try to move us to any alternative energy sources. And this, in the 21st century, this is the type of thing that Nova Scotians are looking for. I mean, people are ahead of the government on this. And I would say that you would be well advised to think about what exactly is coming down the road in terms of trying to cut our costs. We know that just looking at fuel costs in particular, that Nova Scotians will be well served by alternative strategies for production of energy. And with those comments, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat and look forward to whatever comments any of the members opposite have to make on this.
Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a few minutes to speak to Bill 20 because I think it's really important that the government hear from as many people in this legislature as possible about what the real concerns out in our communities and across the province are with respect to Nova Scotia Power and with respect to a growing problem for many Nova Scotians, and that is the affordability of energy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've heard from many members who've talked about what Bill 20 does, that it limits Nova Scotia Power to one general rate increase per year. But Mr. Speaker, the real question, I think, is how much does this bill actually do to protect Nova Scotians from the growing stress on their incomes, their household incomes, to be able to afford electricity. And Mr. Speaker, for all too many Nova Scotians, this is a substantial problem, a growing problem, a problem where we have seen the costs of electricity over the past 2 years in this province escalate beyond the means of more and more people, a growing number of people in our constituency, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, this is not only a problem for people who are in receipt of income support. This is a problem for people who are working. This is a problem for people who live on fixed incomes. This is a problem for seniors in our communities who have other demands on their incomes, often a growing demand to purchase health care services and pay premiums on their drug plans and co-pays for prescriptions, Mr. Speaker. And quite often that's the choice that all too many people are facing. Will I be able to pay for my power, my electricity? Will I be able to pay for my car insurance? Will I be able to pay for my drugs? And so, Mr. Speaker, we do need to ask ourselves, to what extent does this bill address the serious problem of affordable energy for people? Mr. Speaker, I'm probably one of the few people in this chamber who's ever appeared in front of the Utilities and Review Board as an expert witness. The Minister of Labour says that he too has appeared in front of the Utilities and Review Board as an expert witness and gave testimony. And the Minister of the Public Service Commission also has been in that position. And so, Mr. Speaker, it's a very interesting process. Now, mind you, I have not been in front of the current configuration of the Utilities and Review Board, but the prior configuration of the Public Utilities Board, when Nova Scotia Power was still a Crown corporation. And if there's anything that I would say to the honourable member from Halifax-Chebucto, who last evening spoke at some length about the questions and concerns he had with respect to the privatization of Nova Scotia Power, I would like to say to him that I didn't like Nova Scotia Power any better when it was a public utility than I do now that it's a private utility. Nova Scotia Power, when it was a public utility, had a fairly ruthless reputation and approach to its credit and collections practices. And as a Crown corporation and as a monopoly on energy in this province, they routinely used the big stick of disconnection as a credit and collection tool. Now, very few businesses in our province are able to muster that kind of power, no pun intended, as a credit and collection practice. And Nova Scotia Power were ruthless, they were unrelenting, and certainly with respect to people living below the poverty line, quite often women and children who are disproportionately represented in the groups living below the poverty line, their approach to credit and collections around outstanding power bills was a sight to behold, Mr. Speaker. And I was part actually of a small effort out of the Dalhousie Legal Aid office on Gottingen Street. We made a videotape called Disconnection, the credit and collection practices of Nova Scotia Power. And in that particular production, there were a number of customers of Nova Scotia Power, mostly single-parent mothers, who told the stories of the credit and collection practices of Nova Scotia Power. Their stories were supported by members of the clergy who often saw these families coming to them, looking for assistance in getting financial support to either get the lights back on or to keep the lights on. And the legal aid clinic had decided, because we had done so many interventions. In fact, I remember being on the courtroom steps here down on Lower Water Street on the 23rd of December, Mr. Speaker, attempting to get a certiorari application heard to require Nova Scotia Power to restore electricity to a family over Christmas. And the Power Corporation's lawyers literally met us on the steps of the courthouse and said that they, as we spoke, the workmen were out restoring power to the family. And they were not doing this in an altruistic way. They were terrified of the precedent that this particular case was going to set if we got before the courts with it, because it truly was an abuse of power on the part of the Power Corporation with respect to their practices, their credit and collection practices. Mr. Speaker, since I've been a member of this chamber, my constituency office is frequently contacted by members of my constituency who are experiencing difficulties with Nova Scotia Power with respect to the affordability of their electricity and with respect to keeping the lights on. And I would be very surprised if there are any members in this legislature who haven't encountered those situations. And Mr. Speaker, they are very difficult situations, as you may know yourself. I mean, first of all, the customer services representatives that work in the Nova Scotia Power call center are not permitted to provide their full names to the customers that they're dealing with on the phone. So right away, as an MLA, if you're trying to call through to that number and speak to the customer relations officer who's been dealing with your constituent, that's an impossibility. The other thing that happens, Mr. Speaker, is unless your constituent adds you to their account, Nova Scotia Power won't speak with you as an MLA, trying to get information, trying to intervene to keep the power on for a family in your constituency. So you have to go through that little procedure and be added to the account of your constituent. And then perhaps eventually, Mr. Speaker, you will get to speak with a supervisor on these accounts. And with a little luck, you're able to arrange some kind of a payment scheme that is manageable for your constituent. And often, certainly in my office, we involve the Department of Community Services as well, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, the question of affordability of energy lies at the heart of these processes. You know, we're often able to keep the lights on or get them turned back on, but, you know, I rarely feel good about that because I know that my constituent is having to pay for that electricity out of their food budgets because anything that community services contributes is treated as a special need and is recovered as an overpayment then in the subsequent months. And quite often, families, once again, will fall into arrears on their power because they're confronted with making a choice between unaffordable electricity or feeding themselves and their children. So, Mr. Speaker, does this bill address those serious problems? Does this bill do anything to assist people in making electricity a necessity of life and not something that they can go out and buy freely from alternative sources? Because Nova Scotia Power has a monopoly. What options do people have? Does this bill improve those situations? And Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that it doesn't improve the situation for all too many people in my riding and in our province. And as I said, not only people who are on income support, but also people who are working and working very hard, but with very low take-home pay, and people on fixed incomes, and particularly seniors and people with disabilities. Now, Mr. Speaker, many people here have raised concerns about the lack of a conservation plan for Nova Scotians and Nova Scotia Power's seemingly inability to get its act together to produce alternative energy and conservation measures that would really make energy more affordable for people. Mr. Speaker, the very people who can't afford to pay high electricity costs are the same people who can't afford those conservation measures in their homes. Insulation, new windows, all of the kinds of things that can be done to limit energy use, new appliances. These things are not cheap. They're extraordinarily expensive, and for many Nova Scotians, they're beyond their reach. And any of the programs that I've seen to date out of this government have not really addressed the problem of people who don't have money in their hands up front to be able to invest in the conservation measures. So, you know, again, this is such a small, small piece of what needs to be done to address what is a much larger and much more substantial problem. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the final, I think, concern that many people have, and a growing sense of concern and urgency in the province and in our country is the environment and the degradation of the environment. We've seen the study that just came out of the UK with respect to the potential economic impact on climate change. And Mr. Speaker, I don't think there's anybody in this chamber who feels they can stand and be proud of the fact that Nova Scotia Power is one of the it's the fifth worst polluter in North America. That is truly, I think, a very sad state of affairs, and in a province that is as extraordinarily beautiful and as enriched in many respects as ours is, this truly is a mark, a very negative mark on our reputation. And we can do a lot better, Mr. Speaker, and sadly the government doesn't see the urgency of having to address this situation. And Mr. Speaker, it truly is an urgent situation. It's something that we need to deal with. I think the last point I would like to make, Mr. Speaker, is the concern that certainly members of my constituency have, and I don't think they're unique in this, the concern that Nova Scotia Power has not adequately maintained or invested in its infrastructure. And people are finding it very hard to accept the explanation, some people would say excuses, that Nova Scotia Power officials advance in the instances that we see that are all too frequent now of power outages and power failures. In the north end of Halifax, we see these power outages quite frequently, Mr. Speaker. And when they happen, the lights, the stop lights are gone, the street lights are gone, and people in the high-rise apartment public housing manors where senior citizens live in high proportion, they are left. Sometimes people who are in need of medical assistance with oxygen and the needs for insulin and what have you, they're left to wonder how long are these power outages going to last? Is this a power outage that's going to last for 5 or 10 minutes or a half hour, and I don't really perhaps need to be too concerned? Or is this a power outage that's going to go on for several hours? What does that mean when you're on the 16th floor of a high-rise apartment building and you're a senior citizen that requires medical attention, and you're a diabetic, and you may have any number of other health issues? How do you get out of that building if you need to get out of that building? How do people get to you if you need attention and medical attention? Mr. Speaker, we have become so dependent on electricity. There are so many things in our homes that only function because of electricity. Telephones today function only because of electricity. people are reliant on their communication to the outside world, to get information from the outside world, television, radio. There are an awful lot of people, Mr. Speaker. If we were in an energy blackout that really indicated a crisis, I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, how well prepared we are to deal with the many, many, many people who wouldn't even know what had occurred and what it is that they should do, what would be the most sensible thing for them to do. How do we communicate with people, given our energy dependent on all of those devices that are our communication tools, like our telephones? Not everybody has a cell phone, not by a long shot, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, so this is a very serious concern. It's a concern I have as a member of this legislature who represent a lot of very fine people who are elderly and who aren't into a lot of the cell phone gadgetry and what have you, and they're very reliant on the traditional means of communication, and often live in buildings, Mr. Speaker, accessible only through really the elevator system, which, as you know, Mr. Speaker, unless there are generators in those buildings, and certainly there are an awful lot of buildings in this city that do not have generators for lights in the hallways, for elevator services, then you're looking at people who are not physically capable of getting up and down large number of stairs. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill, one of the former speakers called this bill, I don't know, the bill of small measures or limited measures. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is certainly a bill that I could support, but Mr. Speaker, it's not a bill that does a lot to address the fundamental, the core, the very serious problems that are growing for many people in our province with respect to the affordability of energy. And I would encourage the government to really get its act together on this one. People are growing increasingly dissatisfied and disillusioned with the ability of this government to manage the issues that are of most importance and have the biggest impact on them and on their households. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place. Thank you.
I acknowledge the Minister of Environment and Labour. It will be to close debate on Bill number 20. Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the speakers opposite for, I was going to use a pun, their enlightening comments. Appreciate it. I think I heard their support for the bill, and what they were saying in the end was that they wish the bill would go further, but as it stands, they will support the bill. Heard their talk on renewables and the need to pursue renewables, and I'm sure the Minister of Energy heard those comments as he sat through this discussion himself, and in fact tried to ask a few questions during the process of the debate to clarify that. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, and with the thanks to the opposition, recognize that debate's closed on this bill, and it'll move on to law amendments.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 20, the Public Utilities Act. Is the House ready for the question? Will all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 20, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 380, the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill number 9, Municipal Government Act.
Bill number 9, the Municipal Government Act. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and say a few words about Bill 9 as second reading of this amendment to Municipal Government Act proceeds. Actually, the bill is very straightforward, and if passed, Halifax Regional Municipality will provide funding, supplemental funding to the CSAP, or Conseil Scolaire Acadien Provincial, which is the French language school board. As everyone would know, at least those who are in HRM, Halifax Regional Municipality already provides supplemental funding to the Halifax Regional School Board, but only to the, but not to CSAP. Under this legislation, where HRM provides funding to the English School Board, it would also provide funding for the French School Board. In this regard, HRM would have two choices. It could either provide a share of the existing supplemental funding to the French Language Board, or it could provide additional funding. This choice, Mr. Speaker, is one that will be made by HRM Council. Whatever choice HRM makes, the contribution to CSAP must be in proportion to the number of students attending CSAP schools. Mr. Speaker, so that's really the bill in a nutshell, is the provision of supplemental funding to the French Language School Board in HRM in a proportion similar to that which is provided to the English Language School Board. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will move second reading of Bill number 9.
The Honourable Member for Sackville Cobequid.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to stand and have a few words, or say a few words on Bill number 9, Mr. Speaker. In HRM, especially, Mr. Speaker, it's always been a hot topic, talking around supplemental funding for the Halifax Regional School Board, Mr. Speaker. After amalgamation, Mr. Speaker, there was an amalgamation of the school board, and the funding formula that the municipality has with the school board differs from the core city, Halifax, Dartmouth, and the old county of Halifax, Mr. Speaker. And it's always been a contentious issue with the municipality. I know the mayor for HRM has always spoke around the need for government to revisit what the funding formula is for education here in the province, Mr. Speaker, especially around the funding that the municipality here in Halifax gets. I don't want at any time state the importance of funding throughout the province, and that one area should be cut to fund another area, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that I know needs to take place here in the province is the implementation of the Hogg report, Mr. Speaker, and that hasn't taken place as of yet. And I think we need to look at and hopefully encourage, and government realizes the importance to implement those recommendations in the Hogg report, Mr. Speaker. And I know over the years the increases that the different school boards were supposed to get they've been trying to negotiate with the province, Mr. Speaker. And some of the smaller school boards, there's a big issue with the out-migration of the population in some of our rural communities, and the majority of those individuals, if they don't leave the province, Mr. Speaker, which many of them do, end up towards the metropolitan area here in Halifax, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's worth noting that, the government needs to recognize that and needs to take action to hopefully help the Halifax Regional School Board continue to offer the services that they do, Mr. Speaker. It's always important that we recognize the need to properly fund the school boards in this province, especially those school boards that are strained at the moment trying to find the funds needed to continue promoting and delivering the services that they do now, Mr. Speaker. Many of those services have been cut over the years because of lack of funding, a lack of, I think, a will maybe from the government to look at what funding is there in place now and changes, because it's an evolution, Mr. Speaker, of population changes and shifts in the province, and figures that we came about years ago don't work today, Mr. Speaker. And as a father of 2 young kids, Mr. Speaker, in the school system, my son just started this year, Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned with what the future holds for them, especially from representing an area that came from the old Halifax County, Mr. Speaker, where supplemental funding is significantly lower in the region that I represent, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering and concerned on what implications that will have on my children and the children of the residents of the area that I represent, Mr. Speaker, in the future. I don't want to see those extra curricular courses or courses that seem to be not so as important, Mr. Speaker, be cut in the future because they can't fund them anymore. Things like drama courses, Mr. Speaker, are, I think, very important to the delivery of education in the province, and it hopefully improves the outcome of our children in their professions down the road and the choices they have and the choices they will make, Mr. Speaker, in trying to come up with a career choice for those individuals, Mr. Speaker. So I do have concerns with cuts to programs or the inability for the school boards to fund the curriculum as it is today in the future, as expenses rise, Mr. Speaker, as that shift in population happens, where we're seeing more and more Nova Scotians come to the larger urban areas, Mr. Speaker, like Halifax Regional Municipality. And I think government needs to recognize that, and they need to start implementing changes to hopefully promote and support that shift we see in demographics, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned earlier around the Hogg report, Mr. Speaker, this is something that needs to be implemented by this government. And I know that members of our caucus, in my caucus, Mr. Speaker, have questioned the current government on this time and time again over the years and tried to encourage them to implement this report, Mr. Speaker. And it's really fell on deaf ears, I believe, at this point, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's important that we recognize the changes in the education system that Nova Scotians want to see. And this piece of legislation pertains to the education of our Francophone residents here in the province, which is very important, Mr. Speaker. They felt that they've been neglected over the years. They felt that they've been denied funding that should have went to them many years ago, Mr. Speaker. And I know from my area the increase in the number of students that and parents that are sending their kids to French schools, Mr. Speaker. I know for myself, when I was growing up, I actually attended one of the French schools that was across the bridge in the military base, Wallace Heights. I can't remember the... Shannon Park, that's what, geez, it was a few years ago. Shannon Park, Mr. Speaker. So it was only for a few years. But I got on a bus every day from Sackville and was sent to Shannon Park. But the reason I had the opportunity to attend that French school, Mr. Speaker, was that my father was in the military, and it was made up of military families, Mr. Speaker. So it's important that we recognize this demographic in Nova Scotia, that they deserve in this province to seek education in their language of choice, Mr. Speaker, and many of them are choosing now to be educated in French, Mr. Speaker. And I know that the Council Scolaire Acadien Provincial has been a strong advocate to get these changes to take place and to ensure that government's listening to them, that they need these changes to properly fund the education of the children that decide and the parents who decide to send their children to French schools here in the province, Mr. Speaker. It's, I know that I believe it came to, and I could be wrong, but the threat of possibly a court challenge on this, and I don't believe they actually went through that step, but I think they actually made that threat, Mr. Speaker, that that these demographics, this group of Nova Scotians were being discriminated against for not properly being funded in the school systems here in our province, Mr. Speaker. So I know that it's important for many of the families, not only in my area, but throughout HRM, and really throughout Nova Scotia, that government recognizes the need to ensure that these students get the education they want in the language they prefer, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Minister of Health, also the Minister of Canadian Affairs, has stood in this House many times over the last couple of years trying to promote the Francophone language here in the province, trying to offer services from government services in both official languages, Mr. Speaker. And they get an A maybe for effort, but I would say the grade they get is a lot lower than that in implementing these changes and actually delivering the services that they talk about, Mr. Speaker. And we need to continue to push for those changes because we have such a diverse group of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, a diverse history here in Nova Scotia with Francophone and English-speaking individuals, Mr. Speaker, who contribute every day to this province, who contribute to the history of this province, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's important we recognize that. So I do, in principle, support this act, this piece of legislation to go through in hopes that those families in Nova Scotia who choose to have their children educated in the French schools, Mr. Speaker, get the respect that they deserve and get the attention that they deserve, Mr. Speaker. But as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation doesn't solve all the problems that we see, especially in the school board here in the Halifax Regional Municipality, Mr. Speaker. As I said, there's still this constant battle on supplemental funding that the old part of Dartmouth and Halifax and the old Halifax County have. There's difference of opinion amongst members here who represent certain areas, those areas in the province, Mr. Speaker. What I think is important that we all try to encourage representing the residents that we represent to our best of our ability, and that government recognizes that there has been a change, there has been a shift in what Nova Scotians want when it comes to education and the delivery of education, but also the funding. When it comes to education, Mr. Speaker. I believe, if I'm not wrong, I do believe, Mr. Speaker, that the Halifax Regional School Board is the least funded school board in the province, Mr. Speaker. And per capita, I believe the funding towards education and students in our province is one of the lowest throughout the country, Mr. Speaker. And that's something that we need to change. We need to ensure, and government needs to ensure, that our students have the best possible education that they can and that they receive that education in the most appropriate setting. And as we see from this piece of legislation, many Nova Scotians want that setting to be in a French language school, Mr. Speaker. And we've seen their struggles over the years to try to be recognized from government, but from school boards, that they do exist, that they're important, and they're an important part of the education system, Mr. Speaker. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that other members stand and speak on this piece of legislation to give input to the government, but hopefully they recognize the importance of equal funding for students, not only in English-speaking schools, Mr. Speaker, but in French-speaking schools as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today to speak on Bill number 9, the amendments to the Municipal Government Act, and I certainly want to thank my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid for his remarks. Prior to this, Speaker, I'm sure he had the opportunity to speak a bit of the history of what brought us to this specific issue. which is being dealt with in the bill, which in essence is allowing the schools within the Halifax Regional Municipality that are part of the Conseil scolaire acadien provincial to also be eligible for the supplementary funding made available by the Halifax Regional Municipality. Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago I had the opportunity to meet with representatives of Acadian and French organizations throughout the province, and I can certainly tell you that this was one of their most pressing issues, to make sure that the students in their schools were eligible for the same level of supplementary funding that was being made available to neighboring schools throughout the municipality. And I certainly want to take this opportunity to commend the parents and all those involved who helped bring this matter to the forefront. It's unfortunate it took legal action, but I'm certainly pleased to see that the government is moving forward with these changes to make sure that we don't have any sort of discrimination within the supplementary funding system, and that schools such as the Conseil scolaire acadien provincial schools are also eligible for this extra funding. At the same time, Speaker, I think it's important. It's important to take this opportunity to thank both the Mayor Peter Kelly and all of the elected councillors of HRM for the fact that they continue to provide supplementary funding for schools in the Halifax Regional Municipality. And I'm sure that the former Minister of Education, now Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, would be well aware that it is their belief that the province should be picking up this extra cost and not the ratepayers of Halifax, who in essence are being asked to pay twice for educational services, first to their regular educational tax, which all municipal units are expected to pay, but the fact that they are as well providing an additional tax to provide for the supplementary funding. I know there's been a great deal of debate amongst the elected members of the Halifax Regional Municipality as to whether the supplementary funding should continue or whether it's something that they should even be responsible for. So I can appreciate the challenges that they face, and again, I think it's important to publicly acknowledge the contribution that they do make and the importance that that plays for the schools throughout the HRM that benefit. And I have no doubt that the schools of the Conseil scolaire acadien provincial will also be able to put that money to good use for services that are being offered within those schools. And, Speaker, I find it's as well a timely issue because we've heard the government speak more and more about their concern for the military community here in our province. And as I've mentioned before, access to a French language education is of great concern for many military personnel, especially those who are transferred to Nova Scotia from other jurisdictions, who want to make sure that their kids who are in many cases attending French language schools are also given that same opportunity when they come here to this province. So I'm sure that this will be very reassuring for them and certainly fits into the government's overall desire to want to improve military relations and make sure that they're shown the proper appreciation for the great contribution they make not only to our country but certainly to the social, cultural and economic life here in Nova Scotia. Monsieur le Président, je veux juste prendre quelques minutes pour remercier les organisations, les groupes francophones acadiennes que j'ai eu l'occasion de rencontrer. Ça fait quelques semaines. À ce point-là, on a eu l'occasion de discuter plusieurs des projets et des dossiers qui font face à la communauté française acadienne et ici en Nouvelle-Écosse. Et une des questions qu'ils m'ont posées, c'était est-ce que le caucus libéral était prêt de donner leur support au projet de loi numéro 9, qui a à faire avec la subvention d'argent qui est mise par la municipalité d'Halifax envers l'éducation dans la municipalité. Comme on le sait, avant ceci, jusqu'à date, c'était seulement les écoles anglophones qui recevaient la subvention de la municipalité. Et ça a pris un cas qui a été en cours par des parents francophones qui ont dit eux-mêmes le fait qu'ils sont en train de payer leurs taxes ici à la municipalité et qu'eux aussi sont en train de payer la taxe pour la subvention d'éducation. Pourquoi qu'ils n'auraient pas le droit de voir partie de cette subvention aller aux écoles acadiennes comme qu'ils vont à les écoles anglophones. Alors, je suis content de voir qu'ils ont eu du succès en cours pour faire certain que nous n'avons pas la discrimination qui prend place entre les écoles anglophones, les écoles francophones acadiennes. Et je suis content de voir que la province et que le gouvernement est en train d'adresser cette question avec le projet de loi numéro 9. Monsieur le Président, comme j'ai dit, je veux remercier les parents et les organisations francophones qui ont assisté dans ce projet de droit, qui ont eu des réunions avec le gouvernement, avec le parti NPD pour recevoir leur support sur cette question en même temps. Et je veux aussi, comme je l'ai dit en anglais, remercier le maire de la ville d'Halifax et tous les conseillers pour le fait qu'ils sont en train de continuer d'avoir la subvention pour l'éducation ici dans la municipalité. C'est une question, je sais que chaque année, il y a beaucoup de débats et on voudrait voir que le département d'éducation et que ce gouvernement soit en train de mettre le propre montant d'argent dans nos écoles. Faire certain que ce n'est pas juste les programmes d'éducation, mais aussi les programmes de musique et les autres services qui ne seraient pas possibles sinon pas pour la subvention qui est donnée par la municipalité d'Halifax. Et c'est une question pas juste ici à Halifax, mais c'est une question pour nous, quand on regarde dans les autres régions de la province, est-ce que nous sommes en train de recevoir les mêmes services dans nos écoles que les services qui sont donnés ici à Halifax? Et est-ce qu'il y a l'égalité en éducation en même temps? Alors, ce petit projet de loi, la loi numéro 9 ici, Monsieur le Président, mais les questions que s'adressent sont des questions très grandes et des questions qui ont à faire plus que juste la municipalité de Halifax. Mais en terminant, je veux encore féliciter toutes les personnes qui ont joué un rôle dans ce dossier. J'espère que la municipalité va être dans une position de faire l'échange nécessaire pour assurer que les écoles du Conseil scolaire acadien provincial reçoivent le pourcentage de la subvention d'éducation qu'ils ont le droit et que ça peut être mis en place aussi vite que possible pour faire certain que les étudiants et les étudiantes qui assistent à les écoles acadiennes ici à Halifax vont recevoir le même support de la municipalité que les étudiants et étudiantes dans les écoles anglophones. Et je félicite le gouvernement pour avoir présenté ce projet de loi. J'espère que ça va recevoir le support du parti des NPD, que je pense que des commentaires de membres de Sackville-Cobequid indiquent qu'ils vont donner leur support eux aussi. Et j'espère que le projet de loi peut être passé. Et je peux vous dire, Monsieur le Président, que notre caucus va donner leur support et j'espère qu'après la deuxième lecture de ce projet de loi, on va voir s'il va y avoir des présentations au comité de Law Amendments pour voir s'il y a des questions spécifiques à ce projet de loi. Alors, avec ces petits commentaires-là, Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie et j'espère que le projet de loi numéro 9 va passer cette Assemblée avant trop longtemps. Merci.
The honourable member for Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, I wish I could do this in both languages, but merci beaucoup and come on tellez-vous is about the extent of my French. So I'll leave it at that. I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, and I'll only take a minute of time here, but living in the riding of Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank, we've had a growing population in the riding now for the last number of years. And certainly a large part of our population attends the French school. And it was just in recent weeks that I had a number of parents come to my constituency office expressing their concern about the lack of funding as it pertained to the school. So it's good for me, Mr. Speaker, and it certainly speaks well for them to see anything when it comes to additional funding for the French schools within the riding of Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank, and as it affects HRM. So I just wanted, and I think the word for me is wanted. I think I had an obligation to get up and speak to this bill, but not besides the obligation, it was something that I wanted to do as well. I wanted to certainly go on the public record for those students that are going to the French schools, and for those parents that have fought for additional funding and who will be pleased to see this bill move forward. I just want to stress how important funding is for those students and for those families, and because of population growth, this funding will be most welcome. And again, I wish I could end this on a French note like my colleague, but again, the extent is merci beaucoup, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I could just provide for clarification, perhaps in response to some information that.
We're allowed to speak over here.
The Honourable Minister of Education has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I could begin again just to provide some information, point of clarification. Some of the information that was shared by the first speaker, I think, needs to be, I guess, corrected. And that is with respect to the Hogg report. And I think the reference was made that there should be, the Hogg report recommendations should be implemented. And I'd just like to remind everyone in the House, Mr. Speaker, that $5 million went into the budget this year to implement 2 recommendations from the Hogg report, specifically the funding to school boards. So for information, that has been achieved. Secondly, with respect to the funding per student, just again for information, but the funding per student has increased 8.3% over last year for a total of $8,200 per student. And I would remind the House that in 2000-2001, that funding was $5,600. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Madam Minister, for that clarification as well. I think this, at the heart of this bill is the reality of the funding for education in Nova Scotia. And perhaps this is how we're going to see us deal with education funding, is a little bill here and a little bill there, and enough dollars perhaps at the end of the day, and enough directed funding to deal adequately with programs such as French education. You know, certainly in Nova Scotia, we are the second lowest funded now in Canada, and that's, in my view, and our caucus has talked about this, and this is at the heart of supplementary funding. Because if we take a look, and in fact today I believe HRM, I believe the Council today is taking a look at supplementary funding, and some of the items that are now in supplementary funding are really what should be part of mainstream funding for education in this province, and so, you know, French education, physical education, music, you know, these should not be the extras that supplementary funding are being asked to cover, and also some of the administrative and teaching roles are also embraced by supplementary funding. So it is an area that I think the province and the government needs to address in a stronger direction, and not have people paying taxes twice, because supplementary funding and our provincial taxes, you know, they shouldn't be in a double manner to fund education. And one of the things, yes, that the Hogg report has permitted is additional funding to the school boards, an increase of per pupil funding, but in many respects, per pupil funding is really a very limited way of looking at funding education. We need to look at program funding. What are the varied and sundry programs that our school boards are offering across Nova Scotia? And I think that a change and a real strong direction towards program funding, and then you would have something as important as French education in our 13 French schools across the province, and also immersion programs. These, in fact, would be quite adequately addressed if we used that kind of funding. Certainly, in my riding, knowing what happens in the program at École Rose Devant, in the French school there, certainly in a military community of 2,000 plus members in the forces there, and the number that come from French communities across Canada, having that program and that school and having it adequately funded is really essential to offering a basic education in our country and in our province. One of the real worries that I have is that supplementary funding may, in fact, grow to other parts of the province. The school board that I did work for, AVRSB, is now in a discussion around centralization of French immersion programs. That, in fact, French immersion will not be available in some of the schools throughout that school board. And so that certainly, raises a major concern. And also, in fact, we could have parents supplementing, if not directly to the program, but certainly potentially for transportation. And if they want to keep it in their own smaller school, they may, in fact, have to find a way of coming up with adequate funding.
There's too much chatter in the chamber. The honourable member for Kings West has the floor.
Certainly, this is a very, very important issue, and it's one that I believe needs to move beyond this bill and legislation and receive proper addressing, proper funding, and keep French education in this province strong. Anytime I know that I speak to parents in my riding, and I've been to the French Parents Association here in Metro, and I know their passion to see as many programs in our schools. When they lost the delivery of science programs, for example, here again, it was a diminishing of an educational program that those parents felt that they deserved under equal opportunity and equal education here in our province. So it'll certainly there will be others who hopefully will come in to law amendments and address this very, very important issue and this piece of legislation. And Mr. Speaker, with those words, I will take my place.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight's discussion actually is taking about 30 years off my life because indirectly, supplementary funding is how I got my start in small p politics. I belong to a group in Dartmouth that was trying, back in the early 70s, that was attempting to get more women on school boards throughout the province. And I was that club's observer at school board meetings, and I went faithfully every month for about 5 years and followed the ups and downs of the Dartmouth School Board at that time. And it was always interesting to me to see that the tension between the school board and the municipal council rise as you got closer to the budget period. And it was because in those days, actually, the school boards were made up of 50% municipal councillors, 50% appointees from the provincial government. And supplementary funding was always a bone of contention, and it still is today, 30 years later. I have no problem with parents and staff and school boards of the Francophone system wanting their fair share of the resources raised through the area rates in HRM. But I think it points to the, it's like adding another bump to the elephant in the room, which is supplementary funding. And, you know, I think this is an issue at some point that the school boards, municipal governments, and provincial government are going to have to settle once and for all. Despite what, you know, the reassurance from the Minister of Education, supplementary funding would not be such a big issue if it weren't for the inadequate funding formula for the school boards in this province. And it's my understanding that even with the Hogg report, it's my understanding that the Halifax Regional School Board is still not getting the amount of funding that was recommended in that report. Yeah. They're building towards it, but they do not have the full amount. Any comments? Back in 1978, when we had partially elected school boards, 78, yes, a third of them, Dartmouth actually had the first election. And a third of the members were directly elected across the city of Dartmouth. And I'm sure my colleagues to my left would be interested to know that Dr. John Savage was one of the first 4 people elected. I was another one. And so a third of the board were directly elected, a third were still provincial appointees, and another third were representatives, appointees from the municipal government. And those were interesting days, I have to tell you. But again, the tense point of the year was the time when we used to go and present our budget to the municipal council. And those councillors felt that because they were not in charge of spending the money, that they didn't want to have to raise the money. And at that time, the school board was quite prepared to be given tax-raising authority themselves. And, you know, I haven't changed my mind. I think if you're going to have that level of government in this province, this is not a party position, I want you to know, this is my own personal view, is that you have to allow the form of government that is closest to the schools and the community and have the greatest knowledge of the needs in that area, that they should be given the ability to raise money. I have no problem with the levies that the school boards are requesting the municipal government to raise, but I think they should be given direct power, authority themselves to decide how to do that. And I'm just wondering, I know that the whole issue of school boards having taxing authority is being discussed municipally in HRM, and I'm just, you know, I'm hoping that some of the presentations at law amendments on this bill might indicate how the Francophone school board feel about that and how that would be worked into the legislation if those changes were in fact acted upon. I think the underlying principle that the residents of HRM are looking for, what they value the most, is something that's fair and equitable, and across the whole HRM area. It's very difficult to defend why the area rates are different in 4 different regions of HRM under the same school board. So there's a different rate for Bedford, for the former city of Halifax, the former city of Dartmouth, and the former county area. And there's no rationale that I've seen that makes any sense that can explain the difference in the money raised in each area and how it's able to be spent. And I think that that municipal areas and school boards deserve the right to add on to the basic amount of money provided by the province. We'd never want to get into the position where we're content with the lowest common denominator in terms of funding across the province. And I think it's been mentioned earlier in the debate that sometimes it costs more to provide a certain program in one area of the province somewhere else, or one area of a municipality than somewhere else. And so I think there always has to be some flexibility and discretion there to allow that to happen, no matter whether it costs a little more or a little less. So I think parents and school boards should always have the right to add on to the basic curriculum that's provided through provincial dollars. So I certainly support the Francophone School Board having access to these municipally raised supplementary levies, and but I think we failed to come to grips with the wider problem, which is getting a fair and equitable system of supplementary funding across HRM. And I think this is something with the rapid growth in HRM, the fact that 40% of the workforce in Nova Scotia is now living and working in HRM, and it's such a growth area and economic engine for our province that I feel that the provincial government has a responsibility and duty to take a leadership role in trying to resolve some of the tensions around educational funding to that particular school board. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and speak on Bill 9. Mr. Speaker, this bill is about fairness, and fairness to the two boards that provide education in Nova Scotia to our children and our youth. And I don't have a problem with the fairness issue, and certainly we need to share what we do have fairly. However, when you first look at this bill, it's another one of those bills that is very short, and it looks like a good thing at the beginning when you see it. But when I read it now, I realize that there are some questions that pop up. One of the questions is, if we're talking about taking the supplementary funding that's available now and spreading it, it's the same pot of money. The pot of money is not going to grow. It's the same people that have been paying into it and not accessing the funding. So the pot of money is now going to be spread farther and thinner through the programs that supplementary funding provides money to. And so the question then arises, how is that going to affect those programs that supplementary funding has been helping out? And those are programs like our arts programs in the school, music and such. And so that then leads to the question of, you know, is the government going to now provide more funding to offset this money being spread thinner across the province? Supplementary funding has always been, if you want to find an issue to divide parents and quickly, instead of bringing them together, you just need to talk about supplementary funding at any meeting, and people really get heated up. And there's always seems to be a conflict between the Halifax Region municipality specifically and the province when it comes to supplementary funding. And everybody knows this happens every year. What we need to be doing is talking about the things that are stressing the education system now, and that's basically the bottom line is the funding formula that we use, and a lot of the issues that we face now, deferred maintenance, special needs, students needing the resources that they simply aren't getting, resources for our teachers, the way we use our school facilities. We need to look at the dropout rates, the effect of bullying that is having in our school system. And some of these things are addressed through supplementary funding. Unfortunately, and I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about this, I really feel that, you know, supplementary funding, if you look at it, it's become really the food bank of our school system, okay? It's similar to something that was set up to provide some really great extras on top of what we already had. And I really feel now it's because education has been cut down to the bare bones, and it's been cut and cut, and we've ignored a lot of things in the system. The Hogg report did not look at the busing issue in the province. They said it was too complicated or some such nonsense. And so that whole issue has not been looked at. We've got a lot of issues that rural schools face that urban schools don't, and then we've got the opposite. So the question, you know, also is HRM going to provide more funding? Is the province going to provide more funding? Who's going to provide the funding if indeed these the supplementary funding money is spread thinner? And I don't want to see any, you know, it come to an issue where you're now going to be you know, looking at the two different boards and saying, where is the money going to be spent and how is it going to be spent? I think the government, you know, needs to answer the questions that we're going to talk about here today. And the bottom line is they're not funding the education system to the levels that it should be. We're one of the lowest, you know, around, and things don't seem to be getting a lot better for kids that are really in need in the system. The dropout rate is phenomenal, and I think those are things that the government has to look at. So even though I look forward to seeing this bill go through law amendments, it does make me think of a lot of questions, Mr. Speaker, and I hope we'll get some answers to those. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be very brief on this topic. My riding, as you know, does in fact include both rural and urban areas, and supplementary funding is very much a live issue in many parts of this riding. But there's a tremendous and extraordinary differential within the schools, both English and French, and I find it absolutely extraordinary when I need to go to a similar event or ceremony at any one of the different schools which take place, any one of the different schools in my area, to see that in one school, for instance, I'm thinking particularly of graduations, there is enough money left around for the provision of a comfortable feast and so on for everybody, for parents, for children, for graduates, for everybody. There's carrots and lemonade and sandwiches and cake. And another school may just have lemonade and cake. And at another school, which I could name, I was horrified the last time I visited to find that at the end of the graduation ceremonies for the young people who were grade 6, they were, everybody in the audience was asked to please remain seated while the grade 6s went over to eat cake. And if there was any left over, then everyone else could have some too. And I find it absolutely extraordinary that within a few miles, schools which are delivering exactly the same programs have such an amazing differential in what is available. And although that's not specifically a question of supplementary funding, it does tell us what's left over at the end of the supplementary funding, what it is that has to be paid for. I know that I am literally, I have been told by some schools that if you can bring us paper, that would be wonderful. That is how far down into the barrel people are scratching on some occasions. In other places, it's difficult to actually get somebody to recycle paper because there's always going to be more. So there's a very uneven playing field, even within the municipality. And when you add to that the fact that there are, in fact, 2 school boards functioning. There is the remaining school board, and there is the CSAP, which I must say I am very, very grateful to see. I'm very glad that we do in fact have this school system available to the children of French-speaking parents, and I know that it's a very fine education which is provided. Part of the very fine education, I think, is the strong sense of community which is available in the Francophone schools. And I think you'll find that wherever there is, in fact, a program as opposed to an individual course which defines a body of students, then you will tend to find a very strong sense of community. And I would not want to in any way see one community disadvantaged by the fact that the funding paid for by taxpayers to support the education system is not available to one of those communities. So I would wholeheartedly support the extension of supplementary funding to the other school board, and I would note that we have in the past had separate school boards, but I would not support the dilution of the available funding. Supplementary funding is probably something which shouldn't be required. The province should be funding education in such a way that, in fact, a similar education is delivered, and not just in the narrow sense, not only in the curriculum sense, and even that is not always taking place, but in the sense of extracurricular activities and in the sense of physical plant. So, as I say, I certainly welcome the initiative here. And the former county of Halifax, which is also included in my riding, does not benefit from this. While I welcome this initiative, I hope that it is simply a step along the way to pointing up the fact that the quality of education in this province should not be dependent on the location in which the family resides. We should, in fact, be ensuring that a similar education in the very broad sense is delivered throughout the province, and that can only be the responsibility of the province. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Mr. Speaker, as you can see, this seemingly simple piece of legislation has stirred up a huge amount of interest on the floor of the House. Although the bill is presented to us as an amendment to the Municipal Government Act, it should be noted that the amendment is to the part of the Municipal Government Act that applies exclusively to HRM. The new proposed sections would not have any direct effect outside of the geographic and political area of HRM. Nonetheless, of course, that's considerable because it represents some 55% of the population of the province. And a good many of us here in this caucus represent constituencies that are located in HRM. And many of us have a long-standing interest in how this particular question plays out. Let me say immediately that the basic thrust of the bill is a good idea. Let me say immediately that I think it's long been something of an omission, something of an oversight in the way supplementary education funding has been provided previous to the effect of Bill 9, that the Conseil scolaire has been omitted from the beneficence of the municipal level of government, HRM. That, I think, was a mistake. It was unfortunate, and it is a fundamentally fair and appropriate step that this omission be corrected by legislation. So I think it has to be recognized that the thrust of our sympathies is indeed in favor of what it is that the bill seeks to accomplish. At the same time, we have to recognize what the problems are that we're dealing with, and also recognize what might actually be some problems when it comes to the implementation of this legislation. Let's deal first with what seems to be an obvious problem in the implementation of this legislation. The difficulty is that, of course, the municipality is being given a choice. They're being given a choice as to whether they wish to dilute the existing amount of dollars that is assigned by way of supplementary education funding when the Conseil scolaire becomes part of the objects of this funding. Or will HRM Council decide to add to the number of dollars? That's the option they have. If they don't add to the number of dollars, then in effect what they've done is they will have been required by this bill to consider the fact that there is an extra school board with extra students and that the dollars should therefore go further. Same dollars, go further. Well, that's a difficulty, and that'll be for HRM Council to decide. I think we're flagging that here as something we're simply worried about. But all of that has to be seen within a context. And it's the context of overall provincial funding and the context of overall split between provincial and municipal funding for education that is important to remember here. Let's start with this question of the split between provincial and municipal funding for education. This question in Nova Scotia goes back a long way. I can remember in the mid-1970s, the early to mid-1970s, the Graham Commission report that addressed a whole range of issues of jurisdiction and funding in the province. They looked at how schools were funded, they looked at how hospitals were funded, they looked at how the community services portfolio was funded, and in essence, Professor Graham was asked to try to bring some rationality to how that system was both administered and funded. And the principle that was set out, and the principle that has attempted to be worked out in the ensuing decades, has been that the level of government that has the jurisdictional responsibility for setting the policy, administering some particular topic, should also be the level of government that funds it. Now, that has never been perfectly implemented by any means. The last attempt we saw was about a decade ago when we saw what was called service exchange. This is a common problem around the country. In other provinces, it's known as disentanglement. How do you get one level of government that is not jurisdictionally responsible for some area out of the business of having to pay for it? And that primarily means municipalities. Because municipalities continue to be in a position in our province where they're hit up to pay for the education system over which they have no jurisdiction. The total cost to the municipalities in Nova Scotia for their mandatory contribution, this isn't the supplementary education funding, this is the mandatory contribution. The total number of dollars that municipalities in Nova Scotia have to turn over to the provincial level of government is around $200 million a year. Now that's a substantial number of dollars. And that money is not paid out of revenues that come from an income tax system. An income tax system is probably the sort of fairest and sort of generally most equitable kind of tax system we have. Those dollars that the municipality has to turn over to the province come out of the property tax, which is really the almost exclusive, it's certainly the main element of municipal revenue in Nova Scotia. And property tax is widely seen as essentially not a particularly equitable kind of tax. It's got all kinds of flaws with it as a system. But those dollars are being used in part to fund the education system over which the municipalities have no control. None at all. They don't set the curriculum. They don't hire the teachers. They're not the Department of Education. They're not the school board. They just don't have any power. They simply are the partial funders of that system. This is not a satisfactory state of affairs. We know that UNSM, year in, year out, puts it on record that they don't like it. We know that they're pushing the province to try to make a change. Would that we had some commitment from the government to a phase-out of this. That would be important. I know changes are being talked about, but it would be good if we moved away from that. It would be a very good thing. And it's no wonder that municipalities approach the question of funding for education very warily. There's another problem when it comes to the funding of education at the school level in Nova Scotia. And that problem is the question of the overall level of funding. Even when the province receives the $200 million from the municipalities and adds in monies from the general flow of provincial revenues from other sources, we hear complaints that maybe it's still not enough. I know that there are parents everywhere in this province who are concerned about the quality of education that their children receive. Quality means many things to different families, but they all seek quality for their students. If their children are particularly bright children, they want to see international baccalaureate at the high school level. They want to see extra classes for those students. They want to see their students challenged in particular ways. They want French immersion programs, and on it goes. If their students have some kind of learning disability or a physical disability, they want personalized attention. The parents of those children want personalized attention for those students, and they deserve it and they should get it. Just as we learned when we read the Kendrick report about community services, it's important to think about how to individualize the services that are offered. And that doesn't matter whether it's healthcare, doesn't matter whether it's community services, doesn't matter whether it's education. There should be, as much as possible, a system that recognizes individual differences and tries to deliver high-quality education, in this case, according to the needs of the person who comes to the system. Maybe that means more money. It certainly means more equitable distribution of money amongst the school boards. But what it shouldn't mean is that on top of the mandatory contribution that municipalities are told that they have to make, are required by law to make in Nova Scotia to the education system as a whole, that communities should be driven to say, the system is so bad that on top of the mandatory dollars, we're going to toss in more dollars. Now, I think that if supplementary education funding really were about finding a few extra things that really were a supplement, if we already had a really good system along the principles that I've outlined, maybe there might be a little room left over in some communities for adding on a little bit extra. But you know, historically, that's not what supplementary education funding has really been about in HRM, the one municipality that's decided to pay it. They invented it in HRM, and not even in the whole of HRM. They invented it in the former cities of Halifax, former cities of Dartmouth, and it's now spread out since the formation of HRM. They invented it because they were concerned really about the fundamental quality of the education system. They worried about the quality of the education system. They felt that what they called supplementary education money, supplementary dollars, should have to be put in place in order to give the quality of education they felt their children ought to be receiving in the first place if the system were adequately funded. That's really the story. So, although it's a very good thing that these dollars should also go to the Conseil scolaire along with the other school board, nonetheless, we have to recognize that there is a problem. There is a problem with the quality and funding of our education system, and parents know it. Parents who have their children in the public school system know there's a problem there. Why do we continue to see an increase in the numbers of students who go to private schools? The parents who afford it, the parents who can afford it, are all too often tempted to take their children out of the public school system and take them where they think they're going to get a better education. That's a hard fact. It's not a good state of affairs. It's not desirable. Many of us, like myself, made a policy choice to keep our children all the way through the school system. We weren't entirely happy, but we felt committed to it, wanted to do it, and felt it was the way to learn about the school system for us as parents, and that if that's what was on offer, then our kids would have to take what was on offer. But I feel dedicated, as I know every parent does, to trying to get the best education system for my children and for other children, not just during the time that they're in school. We're looking longer term. We're looking to set up a good system for all students in Nova Scotia well on into the future. So, although in a way this is an HRM question and should be seen as such, it exists in a context in which we have to call into question what it is that's going on with the funding arrangements in our education system. And I want to assure the government members opposite that we're very alert to those questions. And I want to assure the government members opposite that parents are alert to those questions. And I want to assure the government members opposite that parents vote on the basis of their observations and determinations of the education system. That is something that is universal in this province, along with healthcare, and people pay attention to it. They want it, they value it, and they insist that they are going to get a good education system. This bill goes a small way towards addressing an inequity. But if the dollars are watered down as a result of this, then we will have achieved a small form of equity, but at the expense of another form of equity. So I hope that first, when HRM Council receives this new power, it looks seriously not at reducing the supplementary education dollars, but increasing them. When the Municipal Government Act was first put in place after amalgamation, or at the time of amalgamation, actually, it was before the Municipal Government Act. At the time of the legislation to create HRM, there were clauses in the statute that essentially said to HRM Council that they could phase out by up to 10% the supplementary education funding, by 10% per year. It was clear that it was being suggested to HRM Council that they phase it out. That's not what HRM Council has done, although they've wavered a little bit about that money. Now we're finding a crunch, and I hope that the Council, when it receives this new power, looks seriously at increasing it. But I also hope that in the budget this year, we see solid measures from this government to increase the funding of the education system overall and in an equitable way amongst all of the school boards around the province. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations to be to close debate. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the members on the opposite side for supporting the bill, saying that it is a good bill. Some of the information which did come from the members on the opposite side of the House, I think, is open to debate. But anyway, with those few words, Mr. Speaker, both the opposition parties do recognize that extending the supplemental benefit to the CSAP under Municipal Government Act is a good thing, and I'd like to thank the honourable member from Halifax-Chebucto for pointing out that this legislation does apply only to HRM, and also for pointing out that the section in the MGA did appear because at the request of HRM. And Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I'll close debate on Bill number 9 and ask that the vote be called.
Okay, the motion is for second reading of Bill number 9, the Municipal Government Act. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 9, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to call Bill number 15, Municipal Government Act.
Bill number 15, the Municipal Government Act. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise to say a few words in second reading to introduce Bill number 15, the Municipal Government Act amendments. It's a very straightforward bill, Mr. Speaker, and if passed, what it does is it provides the HRM Council with the authority to reduce the property tax payable on a residential property if the assessed value is increased more than a specified percentage. In other words, if the property assessment increased over a certain by over a certain percentage over the previous year, the owner could, with the if the HRM so desired, get a tax break. And this authority was granted first to HRM in the 2005-2006 year. It did expire, so really what it really amounts that if this bill is passed, and I hope that the opposition parties will endorse it, HRM Council will be able to apply the program in any year it chooses without requiring legislation. Mr. Speaker, this amendment has been requested by HRM, and with those comments, I will move second reading of Bill number 15.
The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how best how to characterize this bill. I think the explanatory note, although only 2 lines, maybe 3 lines at the most, probably describes the bill adequately. I think, Mr. Speaker, I think you'll recall that on at least one occasion, if not 2 or 3 occasions, I've risen in my place here at the House and talked about property assessments in the riding of Waverley Fall River Beaverbank and the hardships that residents were facing in the riding as a result of increased taxes, especially those residents with significant history in the riding. Those residents that now are at the age of having fixed incomes, no longer in the position of having that income coming into the family home, able to support the homes that they do have, with the increases in taxes in the new homes that have built in the area, the $300,000 plus homes.
Order, please. The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank's having a hard time hearing himself speak. So, the honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill is a simple one, simple in nature, but let's not just look at the simplicity of the bill and let it confuse us. This bill was inspired from my research by the request of HRM. Mr. Speaker, it has been discussed or raised at time in the House, and I was mentioning about the increase in residential property taxes within HRM, and I can speak specific for the Waverley Fall River Beaverbank riding. And I would like to say, as the MLA, as the representative for that riding, any sort of legislation that will ease the burden, ease the hardships on those residents would be fully appreciated. The rising taxes, Mr. Speaker, are an ongoing concern for residents, and I would probably say throughout all of Nova Scotia. I might take some risk in saying that, but I think that's a common thread throughout this province. It remains a concern for many of us, I would think, even in this House. This bill will serve HRM to reduce taxes as deemed appropriate. Positive step to decrease the burden on families within HRM would be looked upon certainly by this side of the House as beneficial and as favorable. I could probably talk at great length about the tax situation in HRM when it pertains to assessments and property taxes, but I think it's a given. I think we are all fully aware of the the hardships that family have suffered over the years, and any measure, regardless of how small it may be, would be a step in that direction. It is with I almost said the word eagerness, and maybe I might modify that a little bit, but it is with some enthusiasm that that certainly I support this bill. And taking into consideration the time of the hour, I would like to adjourn debate on the bill.
The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader. Oh, sorry. There's a motion to adjourn debate. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary by nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today. I call upon the House Leader for the official opposition for the agenda for tomorrow's.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hours for tomorrow will be starting at 11 a.m. in the morning and concluding at 2:45 in the afternoon. And the business to be called after the daily routine will be resolution number 656 and resolution number 658. I now move that we adjourn the House until 11 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Motion is carried. We stand adjourned. We now reach the moment of interruption. The subject this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Cape Breton South. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Government immediately implement a review of the current state of the bridge infrastructure within Nova Scotia with the goal of implementing a program to help address safety risks. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and speak on the matter of bridges here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, many bridges in our province are in state of despair. After the disaster in Montreal back in September, bridges and overpasses have become a major topic of discussion, and I think we have to address this issue immediately, if that is possible. Bridges have collapsed in Nova Scotia in the past, and fortunately nobody was hurt, but we cannot take that chance that every time a faulty bridge collapses that nobody will be on it. In August of 2003, a two-lane wooden bridge in Matagan collapsed moments after a transport truck crossed it. With more transport trucks on our roads every day, it is only going to become worse as time goes by. Now, these bridges may have been old and outdated, but it still begs the question, Mr. Speaker, why have these out-of-date bridges been allowed to serve in the public? A 10-year study by the Department of Transport released in 2001 estimated that $560 million was needed for the bridge repairs and replacements over the next decade. Nova Scotia's highway engineers assess bridges in this province on a daily basis, and they are recommending we need over $500 million in the next decade for bridge repairs alone. Some bridges in our province are over 100 years old. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Transport and Public Works is responsible for operating and maintaining more than 4,100 bridges on 23,000 kilometers of road in this province. So why have these out-of-date bridges been allowed to serve the public? Well, Mr. Speaker, I can give you a few ideas of my own why. This province has a deficit of $3.5 billion in road repair. The need is over $400 million per year to bring our roads up to standard. We are putting about half of that amount into our roads as of today. In Digby Annapolis, we don't even have our roads finished yet. Yet we're behind $400 million per year in road work. So if the roads are not finished in our province, how could we ever get at repairing our bridges. We can't even cut the alders in Digby. The ditches are full of alders and mud because there's not money enough to do the job. Before I came into this job 3 years ago, the Department of Transport in our riding of Digby-Annapolis was digging mud out of the ground to put on our roads because they were saving $1.50 per ton. For 10 years, this went on in Digby and Annapolis. And every day it rained, the cars was in clear to the frame. Tow trucks made more money than regular people around Digby and Annapolis. The average person in this province spends $350 per year repairing their cars from bad roads. The local machinery that the department uses, they're welding it together piece by piece to keep it going. As people move away from the rural areas of Nova Scotia, we're going to see more and we're not going to see more, we're going to see less road work done.